Hi there everyone, Dave here again with another model rocket build. This one is the Estes Cadet. This is a great beginner model. You can probably put this whole thing together in less than an hour. It's all pre-colored, so you don't have to paint it. And pretty much it all just glues together really quickly, and I'm guessing that you could actually have this from kit to flyable in about 2 hours. And that's even giving enough time for all the glue to dry. As always, we'll want to check through and make sure that we have all of the materials here. So we do have a set of self-adhesive decals. These will be the last thing we use. We have the nice red pre-colored body tube. We have the nose cone here, and it's got some additional plastic parts down here that are not used for this rocket. However, this is actually a tail cone for simulating a nozzle, and so I would actually hang on to this, and if you get into designing and building your own rockets, this will be a nice thing to have. But we're just going to cut this off. We have a fin assembly that will glue into the aft end of the rocket, and then inside this little parts package we've got a parachute, an adapter ring that will hold the motor mount tube, engine retainer clip, elastic shock cord. These are actually in place of the launch lug, so these are launch guides that will fit on the outside. And then we've got an engine block and a little retainer ring here. Alright, so everything is here. You'll also want to have a hobby knife, some masking tape, some plastic cement, maybe even some white glue or yellow glue. Okay, and then a pencil and something to cut with. You can use your hobby knife again for that, or a pair of scissors, and you probably need a ruler of some form. First thing on our instructions is to assemble the motor mount. And so here we have the motor mount tube. And the first thing we need to do is make a mark here at 1 inch or 25 millimeters from the base. Okay, so that will be right here. And then we'll need another mark at 6.4 centimeters or 2.5 inches from the base. So that, oops, keep moving on me here. So 6.4 will be right there. Okay, and then we're going to use a hobby knife to cut a little slot up here at this one. So this is going to be the forward end of the motor mount. Just about 3 millimeters or so here, just the width of our engine retainer hook. So we can just pop that in there. Needs a little bit more. Just like that. Alright, and then we have this retainer sleeve, and it is going to hold the engine hook in place here, but still give it some flexibility down here at this end. And so that is going to be mounted so that it's even with the first line we made. I'm going to extend that out so you can't see it. Okay, so we're going to put some glue on here and then slide that in. Alright, so I'm using some wood glue here. You could also use white glue, either one's fine. And I'm just going to run a bead around this. And this doesn't need to be very thick because this retaining ring is going to fit pretty tightly. I'm just going to use a finger to go all the way around here. And then I'm going to slide this down to the mark. And then just remove the excess glue here with my finger. Okay, and I'm just going to use a little bit more glue to make a fillet along this side. Okay, now this little retainer ring, it normally should not have a lot of force applied to it, but just help keep it in line there. Okay, and that can dry for just a little bit. The next step we can do while it's drying, and that is to put in the engine block. So that's this ring here, and it's going to fit right on the end, up against the end of the engine hook there. And so all we have to do here is just put a little bead of glue in. Now we don't want to get too much on this because we don't want it to run down past the engine hook. So I'm going to use my finger to smooth this out really well and not have it dripping down inside the motor tube. Okay, so just like that. And we'll just put this in until it abuts against the hook there on the inside, and then just make sure it's even. If you push down on this too far, it'll actually tilt downward on the opposite side of the engine hook. We don't want that. So right there is good. And that can sit and dry. The next thing to do now is to install the engine mount into the fin assembly. And there's a notch right here in the fin assembly, and that's where the engine hook should go. So this should slide in like this, and then the engine hook there will slide into the notch, and then this is just going to slide up until our hook retainer ring here, you'll feel it just hit the inside. Okay, and that's ideally, this should be about flush. If it's in a little bit, that's fine there. Okay, eventually we want this nice and locked in so it doesn't move around. So it's good to have it right up against that internal ring. And then what we're going to do, and this is just dry fitting here, is this big ring here will go on top. And when we glue it in place, that will lock it up against here. And so the inner ring is locking against the inside, this is locking against the outside, and this is going to hold the entire thing in place. Okay, I'll make sure that didn't move. No, it's actually bonded well. You might want to actually wait about 10 minutes or so and make sure that this glue is good and dry, just so it doesn't slip on you. If you've ever built the Estes E2X or the generic E2X, this is the same type of retaining system they're using in that. And so this may seem familiar to you because it is. Alright, so now what we're going to do is add a bead of glue in here. Okay, now a word of warning, when using wood glue, the yellow glue like this, it bonds quicker than white glue does. So when you get this on, you want to make sure and push it all the way to where it's going to stop in one movement. If you hesitate, it may bind early and you won't be able to get it all the way down. Okay, so here I've got it ready to go. I'm just going to slide this on like that. Alright, it's trying to push out the other end. I don't want that. There we go. Okay. There's a little bit of play still in there. And we can fix that. If you can't push it down any farther, as it's already locked up there, when we put the body tube on here, that will also fix that remaining play down there. So don't worry about it. Unless this is traveling a really long distance, you don't need to worry about that. And so now we've got some excess glue up here. I'm just going to smear that around the inside, and it'll just help lock everything into place. Okay, now I'm letting this dry, but while I'm doing that, I'm going to make a suggestion here. This does not show up in the instructions, but especially if you've got a little bit of play here and a little bit of gap like I do, one of the things you can do is take some thick super glue or cyanoacrylate cement and put that in here and then push this up and let that bond there. And then when we go to put this into the body tube, it will all move as one unit. So I'm going to do that here. I'm not quite sure why I've got that space there. The measurements were all right. I think maybe that little retainer ring shifted a little bit. Okay, but I'm just going to put a bead of this around here. Now remember, super glue sticks to flesh immediately, so don't get it on your skin. But the thick kind is good for gluing plastics to paper and cardboard. The thinner, more runnier stuff does not work as well for this. Okay, so now, again, make sure that you don't move it away from that slot. Now I'm going to push that up. It's kind of squishing out around. So here you can take a paper towel or tissue and wipe off that excess. You don't want a ridge of super glue sticking out around this. If you don't have super glue but you have plastic cement, that will work too. It just doesn't work quite as well. But it's a good second choice. Alright, so I'm just going to hold this here for about 60 seconds, which is theoretically the bond time on this. Now my fin assembly is almost ready to go into the body tube, and something I want to show you here is just something that will help in inserting this in. Sometimes these tubes get a little bit mashed inward on the ends here, and you may see kind of a little lip of cardboard there. And what you can do is just take a thumbnail or a fingernail and stick it inside there and just run it around the circumference like this, and this just helps poke that back toward the outside and now makes it a little bit wider opening to get other pieces like this or the nose cone into. Okay, so here they're wanting to use white glue or yellow glue on this again, and that's fine. What we're going to do is put a bead of glue inside the tube so that as we push it in, any excess glue gets pushed up inside the tube and not back out onto the fin assembly. Okay, so just run a bead of glue around there. That is really heavy. I don't know if you can see that in there. Probably don't need quite that much glue, but it's not going to hurt anything. And what I'm going to do now is just put this in, and I'm going to give this a twisting motion as it goes in. And this is just to help spread the glue evenly. Okay, and then when I get down here and just firmly push, you don't have to be really hard about it, but firmly push it all the way down so that we get a good seal against the fin assembly here. Alright, and I'm just going to set that aside for a moment. The engine hook here gets in the way of letting that stand straight up. Kind of stands a little crooked, that's alright. Alright, I'm still letting the fin assembly dry its glue into the body tube here, and I've turned it upside down like this so that if any glue does run from the excess that I had in there, it runs along the inside of the body tube and not into the motor mount. Pretty much if it stays inside the body tube here, it's not going to hurt anything unless you just have rivers of glue coming down it. But if it gets into the motor mount there, it may block the engine. And we don't want that. Okay? And so then we want to take these guides here, and move this out of the way. And these guides are beveled on one end. Okay, so this side is beveled inward, and that should face toward the front on both of them. Now, according to the instructions, one is going to go right up against the base of the fins there, but it'll still be oriented with the bevel side facing forward. And then another one is going to go up about 3 inches or just over 7.5 centimeters from the base. And you'll need to line these up kind of like a gun sight so that one is directly in front of the other. If you have it, you can use a launch rod like this one and actually insert it through before your glue sets. Okay, so that one have to go on like this and like this. Okay, and so you can put this in after you've got the pieces glued, but the glue is not set yet, which means you got to do this fairly quickly. And for this one, they recommend using plastic model cement. You could use the super glue again here, except that we have that problem of the setting time. We want to have a little bit of working time here to make sure that we've got these straight. And if we use the super glue, we're going to have a very short working time. So in this case, it is going to be better to use model cement like this. Alright, I'm just going to check and again make sure I don't have any glue running down here. And I'm going to go ahead and put this first one on. You can also check, the problem with plastic parts is there's always what's called flash on them. And this is just a little bit of plastic left from the mold. And sometimes you can ignore it, sometimes you want to just trim it off a little bit there with a hobby knife. Okay, that one's good. And now I'm just going to dry fit this to begin with. Okay, so this should be on the same side as the engine hook. And it's going to go all the way down to the fins there. In fact, it's going to make a nice cover for that seam between the body tube and the fins. And then our second one will go on here at a point 3 inches from the base of the fin assembly there. And it doesn't have to be exact. Okay, so on this one, it's going to go, there's my pencil. Okay, so it's going to go right about there. I'm just going to make a light little pencil mark there. And I'll actually cover up my pencil mark just barely. Okay, like that. So these aren't that far apart from each other. Okay, so I'm going to slide that one up and slide this one up. Okay, and here what I'm going to do now is, you really got to use some judgment here because you don't want too much glue or you'll get lumps and runs, but you don't want too little or these might come off. Alright, so I'm going to make this bead of glue just a few millimeters above the seam there, and that's so that when I push it down it will smear the glue nice and even. Okay, but I don't want to get it too thick. It started out a little bit thick there, but I think we've got it spread out enough there. Okay, and again I want this in line with the engine hook and make sure my beveled edge is facing forward. Now if you get this on backwards and you don't notice it till later, the rocket will still fly. This just gives you a little bit more streamlining. Alright, so I'm going to line this up with that engine hook and just ease it on down. And once I hit the glue, now I'm just going to give it a twist back and forth a little bit so that it seats itself in the glue well, and then I'm gun sighting it against the engine hook. Alright, so that one is aligned with the engine hook. Okay, and then I'm going to take the second one and slide it down toward my pencil mark, if I can find it again. There it is. Okay, and I'm going to use, now since the pencil mark is just one little hash mark there and doesn't go all the way around, I'm going to use my launch guide here as a gluing guide, and I'm just going to glue right below it. Again, a moderate amount of glue here. Alright. And now again I'm going to now sight front to back, make sure they're in line. And I'm just going to ease this into the glue until I reach my mark there. And again, I'm going to just give it a little twist back and forth to seat it well in the glue. And now I'm going to line it up. Okay, so my eyeball lining looks good there. And I can now take a launch rod. And be careful doing this because you don't want to upset the glue. Alright, so that should be in line with the rest of the rocket there, and it should move freely, which it does. So that looks good. Alright, and now to not tempt fate, I'm just going to let this sit here for a good 10 or 20 minutes and let that glue set well. Actually, I'm going to set this aside and skip over the shock cord bit and go on to preparing the nose cone, and then we can come back to the shock cord when our body tube is dried. Okay, so here's our nose cone. As I said, it's part of another assembly. Estes uses the same nose cone and tail cone assembly in at least 2 other models that I know of. The Crossfire ISX and the Black Brant 3 both use these same assemblies. So if you have one of those rockets, this can also be a spare part. But right now what we need to do is just cut off the spare part here. So right here at the base of the nose cone, I'm just going to take my hobby knife here and just kind of use a little sawing motion as I turn it. If you have a razor saw, that can work well too. You do want to be patient. If you try and cut too deep at once, you might break the nose cone. So just have a little patience. And actually, once you've scored this all the way around, even if it doesn't go through, you can just break it off at that point. Okay. And then there's a piece of flash inside here. You want to remove that, but don't cut through the eyelet, because that's where the shock cord and parachute are going to mount. So we just need to cut it out without cutting the nose cone eyelet there. Alright, and then just remove any other flash that might get in the way. Now, since this is not intended to be painted, there's not a lot you can do here. On almost all these nose cones, there's a seam on both sides here where the mold came together. And when it comes apart, then it leaves a ridge and a groove in here. Now the ridge you can actually shave down if you're patient and careful using your hobby knife. But that ridge is hard to fill unless you actually go through and prime and paint the nose cone. And there's no reason why you can't. But if you want to get this out and flying right away, then you probably don't want to take the time to prime and paint it. If you are going to prime and paint it, though, I would recommend using some fine, very fine sandpaper, somewhere in the 200 to 320 range. And you can use that to sand down the ridge here. It still won't fill in the groove completely, but then if you add some primer to it, and then you re-sand it, you'll fill in that groove. Okay, for now I'm going to treat this like we're just going to take it out and fly it, so I've knocked down the ridge at least here. And you can also use your knife as a scraper and hold it at an almost vertical angle, and instead of trying to cut with it, you just scrape with it. The drawback to that is it does make your knife dull really quickly. So if you've got an old knife blade that's already dull, it'll make a good scraper. Okay, so this is ready, and once the launch guides are ready there and we put in the shock cord, then we'll be ready to go on that. Alright, so for our shock cord, we need to cut out this shock cord mount here. If you don't want to destroy the instructions, then go ahead and just make a photocopy of this and you can cut that out. But the only thing you're going to do is cut out the the title there, basically. You can also just make one of these out of a piece of paper if you want. You can trace the lines so you know where to cut and fold. So this is kind of a classic shot cord mount that the Estes came up with many years ago. Before I started doing this, almost 45 years ago. Okay, and what we're going to do now is simply take this and we're going to smear some glue on it, either wood glue or white glue. And so I'm just going to make a film here. It doesn't have to be really thick, but you do want it to cover the whole paper here. So I'm just going to spread this out. And then I'm going to take my shot cord here and I'm going to lay it down over the 2 and the 3, but at a little bit of an angle. I don't want it to just go straight down the middle. And that's because as we fold this, I don't want it to build up on itself more than it has to. Okay, so let me get this up where you can see it better. Alright, so now what we're going to do is take the 1 section and get my fingernail under there and fold it over the 2 like this. Okay, and then I'm going to take the 2 section and fold it over the 3. Now since my shot cord is at an angle, the cord that's in the 2 position now will lay beside it rather than right on top of it, like this. And now I can pull it over so that it's right up against the shot cord that's folded inside. And now I'm just going to squish this around to get the glue all the way through and to take out any bubbles. All right? Because what we want is a nice uniform thickness of glue all the way through here. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm making a bend in it so the whole thing is curved, and this face here is going to be glued into the inside of the rocket. And so that's why I'm bending this so that this will fit up against the inside of the rocket body tube easier. Okay. In the instructions it says this should go at least 1.5 inches or almost 4 centimeters into the tube. So it's going to be down about that far. What I like to do is simply reach down as far as I can with it. And so if you have long skinny fingers, you can get it to go down farther. And the reason for this is so that when the nose cone is on here, that none of the nose cone shoulder here hits up against the mount. So this should be completely below wherever the nose is. Okay. And even farther down so that this doesn't just get all bunched up underneath the nose cone. So now what I'm going to do is apply some glue to this. And I'm also going to have a handle ready. So I'm going to use my hobby knife. I'm just going to put the blade guard on here. But in case my finger's not quite long enough, I can use this to press down against the inside and make sure that I get a good bond between the shot cord mount and the rocket. Okay, so again, I don't want to use a whole lot of glue here, but I want enough that it covers fully the surface here. So I'm just going to smear this all around. Just like that. And now what I'm going to do is initially I'm going to slide this in, but without the glue touching. So I'm going to slide it in on the base like this. And I'm just going to gently ease it in. Okay, so that's down at least 1.5 inches. Now what I'm going to do is hold on to the shot cord so it doesn't move. And I'm going to flip the whole rocket over 180 degrees. And then I can let go of it. And now this is placing the glue side down against the side of the tube that my hand is against here. So now I can take my finger and push it down farther if I can, which I can a little bit. And now I'm pressing my inside finger against the fingers on the outside of the rocket here, and I'm kind of squeegeeing the glue all the way around in there. Okay, and if you have a lot of excess glue, you can just kind of take it up with your finger. All right, and I don't know if you can see in there all the way. Okay, but now that's mounted, that's probably at least 2 inches, so it's more than the 1.5 inches. And now I'm just going to let this dry for a little bit longer. So I've let the shock cord mount dry for a few minutes, and it's in there well. It's probably not ready to be launched yet, but soon. And so the next thing we want to do is hook up the parachute. And I'm going to show you 2 ways to do this. The way shown in the instructions essentially permanently mounts the parachute to the nose cone. And so I'm just going to take this out, and first thing we want to do is find the middle of this and just hold that with your thumb and forefinger. And then we're going to stretch this out so that we get all of the shroud lines about the same distance here. So they should all be equally taut, shouldn't have any dangling ones there. Alright, and now I'm just going to hold this loop here. There we go. And according to the instructions, they want you to pass this loop through the eye of the nose cone. And then you take the parachute and pass it through this. So you take this whole thing and pass it through there. Or you can take the nose cone and simply pass it through and then pull it tight until you get a knot down here. Now I'm not going to pull this completely tight because I'm going to show you a different way. And for this you're going to need a snap swivel like you would find in the fishing section of a sporting goods store. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back again and recheck my shroud line since I just dropped this. Alright, gather that loop again. But now I'm going to stick this through the swivel portion of the snap swivel. Like this. And I'm going to pass the whole snap swivel through the loop. And bring it down. And then it ties itself into a nice little knot there. Okay, and then if I recheck the tautness of it, it's still pretty close. I'm not going to worry about it. Now the nice thing about this means that you can take your snap part here, snap it onto the rocket. There we go. And now if you decide that you need to change it, so maybe you forgot the recovery wadding and you melted your parachute, or maybe it's a windy day and you're afraid the parachute will carry too far and you want to replace it with a streamer. Whatever you want to do, or if you just want to store it without keeping the parachute all wadded up inside the rocket, you can simply take this off again, change it with something else, put the parachute into storage, whatever you need to do, and then come back later on and put it back on. Now the snap swivel that you need is actually determined by how thick this eyelet is. And so this is actually bigger than I need because I can easily get it through there. On some nose cones though, you have a very thick eyelet, which means you need a big snap like this. Okay, the actual body of the snap swivel doesn't make much of a difference. So I could use with this rocket a smaller snap swivel, and it's still going to be more than strong enough to absorb any type of stresses that this little rocket's going to put upon it. Okay, so it's not the size of the rocket that's determining my snap swivel here. It's the size of the eyelet on the nose cone that I'm putting on. So if you had a smaller one than this, and as long as you can still snap it through there, that'd be fine. Okay, so I'm going to set this aside for the moment. And our last task now is to put shock cord on. So if you've tied the parachute to this, that's fine. Just pass it through wherever the parachute is not. And now you're just going to tie a couple of half hitches onto this, or a double knot. Okay, and go ahead and stretch that elastic really well so that when it comes back it actually helps hold the knot in place. Okay, and I'm just going to pull that down until it doesn't move anymore. You can cut off some of this. Don't cut it right at the base of the knot, but like what I've got here, I can cut off about half of that excess. And then I'm also going to put just a little dab of white glue on there to hold that knot in place, because it really ruins your recovery when your shock cord breaks. And the two places it breaks most often is at this knot and at the shock cord mount. Sometimes that mount just has had too many flights and it gives way as well. And so we'll do what we can to avoid that. So I'm just going to let this dry for a while. And now all I have to do is, when that's dry, I can hook my chute back on and prepare this for flight. Okay, as it is right now, as soon as all this glue dries, it can be flown. Now don't forget that we have these handy dandy decals as well, and you can decorate this in however you want. These are all shaped to fit onto the fins, and then this goes up the length of the body tube, and these two are wraps that can go around various parts of the rocket. So you can make it look just like the one on the package here, or you can use your artistic ability to customize it however you want it. This is your rocket. Use your own creativity. Make it how you want it. So here's my completed Cadet. And I must say, probably the hardest thing for me was putting the stickers on straight. Okay, now one other thing you want to do before you launch this is give it a shake test like this. Alright, the nose cone should not fall out that easily. If it does, add just a little bit of masking tape around the circumference of the shoulder. So I can take this like here, and depending on how loose it actually is, you might start out with half the circumference and then add more as you need to. That's not quite the full circumference there, but we'll try that. And you also want to check and make sure you don't have the opposite problem, that your nose cone is on too snugly. And that one's a little bit harder to test. One way is to actually blow in the back of the motor and see if you can blow it out with your breath. If you can, you're fine. But not all rockets are as easily done that way. Okay, so this is still a little loose, enough so it'll come out. But now if I give it a shake like this, it still stays in place. Okay, so now all I need is some recovery wadding. Make sure to reattach my parachute and a motor in here, and this is ready to launch. Hope you had as much fun building this as I did, and have a good flight.